If you're thinking about purchasing Carcass, well, I'm going to tell you how this gear lock plays. If you don't know anything about Too Many Bones, well, you should watch a review about it first, because this isn't for you. This is for the people who know what's up and who are ready to get cooking with Carcass. Let's put you right there, Carcass, you sweet, sweet, hungry gear lock. Carcass is a very funny gear lock. They went all in on the comedy with Carcass by just giving you this real cookbook with real recipes that you could make in your real life if you wanted to cook like Carcass. But the premise of Carcass is that all throughout the game, Carcass is going to be developing these recipes, starting out with gross food and then figuring out some other ways to cook baddies. And then once you've developed these recipes, then you can place the baddie on the recipe card and then use it for its stats. Because you've basically sliced up these baddies, turned them into stew, or turned them into a canned baddie, which can either deal 2 damage to a non-adjacent unit, or reduce a poison effect die on yourself or an adjacent unit by a number equal to the defense stat of the cooked baddie. +1 if the baddie is a sort of a mushrooms type of character. Or why not have a pan-seared baddie, when you can heal yourself HP? Or you can have the Troll Brew battered baddie, where you can give an ally thick skin. Or you can have the Auget crusted baddie, where you remove all dice from any Gearlock's active slot. What did you just call me? Yeah, you heard me. And then deal true damage to any baddie where the number is equal to the cooked baddie's attack stat. So depending upon what baddie you kill and how you level up your meat hooks, because of course you start the game with this meat hook skill. Dice number 1, your meat hooks are at 1, but you can level that up instead of leveling up other skills, getting it to 2, or 3, or 4, or 5, or even 6, and that's the number of baddies that you can end up putting on your hooks and keeping stored and then brew into recipes in between the game. So that's Carcass's innate skill. And once you get to innate +1, this is one of my favorite builds for Carcass. When you're using your hook meat backup plan, when you have 2 bones and you're using that, you actually get to deal true damage equal to the difference between the value of your meat hooks and the current number of baddies on the meat hook. So if you haven't put any baddies on your meat hooks yet, and you've gotten your baddie dice all the way up to 6, you're like 2 bones, boom, 6 true damage. See ya. And it feels so good to just like take out a baddie immediately like that. That's a fun skill path. So let's go over the skill paths. Let's go over what Carcass has to offer. That's the overview of what you're going to be doing though. You also have this supplies that you can discard loot for, and you can slowly tick them up and up and up. And once you get to 4 supplies, well, then you can discard it and also upgrade your meat hooks in that way. It takes a lot of loot, but if you just happen to be drowning in loot and you aren't using your potions like you should, then you can do that as well. The red dice aren't that interesting. You do have Troll Call, which you can use to replace baddies on the mat. If something flips up and you're like, man, I do not want to deal with that, you can roll your Troll Call and swap some things out. Hunting is interesting because you have reusable bones. I always like dice that have reusable bones on them, because you can just keep using them over and over and over, and then triggering Carcass's Body Harvest, which is Carcass's number 1 backup plan, where you can add a baddie to your meat hooks and just kind of like gear up on them. Now, fast food is actually pretty integral if you want to be cooking baddies mid-game, or mid-round rather. You're only allowed to cook some baddies on your recipes if you've developed your baddies enough. You're only allowed to cook them in between rounds, so fast food allows you to sort of do it in the middle of your battle, which can be important if you want to give yourself that extra bump on a stat. Or this sort of culinary studies and executive chef, that shows how you can learn these recipes, right? You can get these recipes into your rotation. I like that line, because like you've got a whole bunch of buffs that if you don't go in that line, you're not going to use, right? But you don't have to cook them. You can also use any of these orange dice to kind of just use them for different ways. So you don't actually have to have the recipes. You could instead invest in taxidermy, or you can discard baddies for damage, or this hunger strike where you can deal damage equal to the difference between your HP and your max HP. So if you've developed your HP a lot, but all of these revolve around these meat hooks. All of these revolve around getting these meat hooks up, and that's why you can throw things away. And so it's all about managing, leveling up these meat hooks, and then accruing a bunch of baddies and using those baddies to kill the other baddies. I think from a like thematic standpoint, this is probably my favorite themed Gearlock. Maybe Stanza. I think I like Stanza maybe a bit more because Stanza you're playing a bunch of different songs throughout the time, and thematically that's very funny when you're like rocking out and your music is just dealing damage to everybody who can hear it. I think that's very silly. But I think Carcass is a funny Gearlock, a unique Gearlock, and also one that feels horrible to use in Unbreakable. The main reason because of your body harvest, which says add a 3-point or less baddie from the current baddie's defeated stack to the meat hooks. Well, Unbreakable doesn't have any 3-point baddies. You know what does? Undertow, and probably some other ones. So I think that's a reason why Carcass is horrible to be used in the Unbreakable set. I also think Carcass is horrible to use in the Unbreakable set if you're facing off against Cinder, which I was, and it made me so mad because my whole skills were about taking baddies from the defeated stack and putting them onto my meat hooks and then throwing them at people. And I got into a really fun flow of doing that, and I upgraded my skills for those things. And then I faced off against Cinder. And if you don't know about Cinder, well, I shouldn't have put this away, but I'm going to pull it out anyway. Cinder has set this entire battle mat on fire. And so whenever you defeat a baddie, instead of going into the baddie stack, you drop them into one of these holes. And so instead of getting to use these for my fun ability that I developed the whole game, no, we're just going to plop them in here as the win condition for one of the bosses. Horrible. Just a horrible, horrible decision. And also, which is why I think Undertow is better than Unbreakable. If you missed my review of Unbreakable, I also cover the differences between Unbreakable and Undertow, but that's the general gist of Carcass. Those are the fun things about Carcass, is developing these recipes, taking the baddies when you kill them, and then thinking, okay, what stats do they have? Okay, I want to kill that one specifically because it's this specific type, and I want it to be used for my poisonous recipe or whatever. There's a lot of fun little manipulations that you can do, and definitely fun in a group too, as you're getting a bunch of loot, and people are like, I don't need the loot, I don't need this loot, and you can just always turn them into supplies and get a couple bumps on your meat hooks that way. That way you don't have to invest your skill points necessarily into your meat hooks as much. You can also always get this sort of gross food, which you don't need to use as a baddie, but sometimes you get it, you can heal yourself, or you lay a trap of some stinky food that will deal damage to people. Carcass, yeah. Carcass is awesome. Definitely, if you're a fan of the game and you're looking for characters to add, I think Carcass is pretty fun. And I think Carcass is potentially more fun than both Unbreakable characters as well. Carcass kind of ranks in that mid-ground level for me out of the characters that I have tried. So there you go. Check out my other Too Many Bones videos if you want to see any more of my thoughts on the system. My name is Chris George. I don't have a catchphrase, but I have been feeling hungry for something that has not been satiated ever since I went into the Unbreakable. Says here I could use any meat, 1 pound of bog meat, or I can substitute with ground or sliced meat that you have on hand. Huh. Oh, Renee.